Old Rabbi exposes 3 things you must never give away, or you'll stay broke forever. I have buried 3 of my closest friends, not because illness took them early, though illness is patient and takes everyone eventually. I buried them because they gave away the wrong things for the wrong people at the wrong price. And by the time each of them understood what they had done, there was nothing left to rebuild with. My name is Rabbi Ezekiel Maraventhau. I am 81 years old. I have lived in 4 countries, spoken at the bedsides of dying men, counseled the desperate and the proud, and spent more hours than I can calculate, sitting in the back of a small bookshop called Halverson and Dust, watching the young and the talented and the genuinely gifted walk through my door, and walk back out, still carrying the same invisible wound they arrived with. I am not a financial advisor. I have never owned a corporation. I did not build an empire or master a market or retire at 40 with a gleaming account and a house near the water. What I have is something rarer and considerably less glamorous. I have watched. For 8 decades, I have watched human beings make the same foundational error in 10,000 different disguises, and I have reached the age where staying quiet about it feels like a form of cruelty. So today, I am going to tell you what I told a young man named Caspian Drell on a grey Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, when he walked into my bookshop holding a book upside down and wearing a jacket with a broken zipper he couldn't afford to fix. I'm going to tell you about the 3 things you must never give away, and I want you to understand something before I begin. I am not speaking in metaphor. I am not offering you inspiration dressed in the clothing of wisdom. What I am about to describe is a precise and observable mechanism, one I have watched dismantle intelligent, capable people with a patience and thoroughness that would be admirable if it were not so devastating. Pay attention. I will not repeat myself. I grew up in a small town in the eastern reaches of a country that no longer exists under the name I knew it by. My father was a watchmaker. His father had been a watchmaker before him. Our house smelled permanently of machine oil and something my mother put in the bread that I have never been able to identify or replicate in any kitchen since. We were not wealthy, but we were not poor in the way that hollows a person out. We had enough, and more importantly, we understood the distinction between enough and the frantic accumulation of things that some people confuse with security. My father used to say, "A watch that gives away its spring tension too quickly will run fast for a short time and then stop entirely. A watch that holds its tension, that releases it slowly, deliberately, in the right measure at the right moment, will keep perfect time for a generation." I did not understand what he meant until I was much older. Now I think about it almost every day. Because what I have observed in the lives of the people who came to me broken, in the lives of my 3 buried friends, in the long accumulated evidence of 81 years, is that most people who stay financially stuck are not lacking in talent or intelligence or even opportunity. They are lacking in what my father would have called spring tension. They release everything too fast to too many people at too low a price. And then they wonder why they keep stopping. Let me tell you about my friend Paravel Osmond. Paravel was the most gifted architect I have ever known personally. Not famous, not in the way that names appear in large publications or on the sides of important buildings, but gifted in the deep, structural sense. The man understood space the way musicians understand silence, as an active ingredient, not an absence. When he was young, Paravel was generous with his talent in the way that young, gifted people often are, extravagantly, indiscriminately, and with a warmth that felt like abundance, but was actually hemorrhage. He gave his best sketches to clients who paid him the least, because he wanted to prove himself. He gave his full methodology to junior colleagues who later used it to compete against him. He gave his time, his mornings, his evenings, his weekends, to projects that respected neither his skill nor his schedule, because he had convinced himself that volume would eventually produce stability. It did not. When I visited Paravel in the last years of his life, he was living in an apartment considerably smaller than the ones he had designed for other people. He was not bitter. Paravel was constitutionally incapable of bitterness, which was both his finest quality and part of his undoing. But he was tired in the specific way of a man who has been generous without reciprocity for too many decades. He told me once, near the end, that he felt like a library that had loaned out all its best books and never seen any of them returned. I think about that image often. I thought about it when Caspian Drell walked into my bookshop, holding his upside-down book, with the look I have learned to recognize immediately. The look of a man who has been giving away his spring tension and cannot understand why he keeps stopping. I told him to sit down, and then I held up one finger. The first thing you must never give away is your time. I want to be precise here because imprecision on this point has ruined more people than I care to count. I am not speaking about hours in the abstract. I am not delivering a lecture about productivity or the importance of being busy. I am speaking about something far more specific and far more precious. I am speaking about your deep time. Your deep time is the period of your day, and it varies from person to person, so you must know yourself well enough to identify it. When your mind operates at its genuine peak. When your thinking is sharpest. When the work that only you can do becomes actually possible. For some people, this is the early morning. For others, it arrives late at night. For a fortunate few, it appears in the suspended hours of the middle afternoon. Whatever its shape and timing in your particular life, that time is your most valuable asset. And most people sell it for the lowest price. They give it to emails that could wait, to calls from people who have learned that their requests cost nothing, to obligations that feel urgent because someone else's anxiety has been successfully transferred onto them, to clients who pay the least but demand the most, because underpriced relationships always create overextended expectations. I have watched gifted people spend their sharpest hours servicing mediocre demands, then spend their exhausted hours trying to do their finest work, and then wonder why their finest work never seems to arrive. It has arrived. You simply weren't present to meet it. When you give away your deep time, when you allow others to colonize it with their priorities, their crises, their chronically open palms, you are not being accommodating. You are being careless with something that cannot be manufactured, borrowed, extended, or recovered under any circumstances whatsoever. Time, unlike money, does not respond to effort. You cannot work harder to get more of it. You cannot save it up. You cannot borrow it from the future and repay it when conditions improve. Every hour of deep time you give away for less than it is worth is simply gone, permanently, without appeal. My father's watches kept perfect time because the spring released its tension in the right measure at the right moment, and not a fraction sooner. Guard your deep time with that same precision. Give it only to exchanges that genuinely deserve it. Exchanges where the return is real, where the respect is mutual, and where what you build with those hours is something you will still be able to point to with dignity when you are my age. Everything else can wait. I held up a second finger. The second thing you must never give away is your knowledge. Now, I need you to hear what I am actually saying, because this is the point most commonly misunderstood, often by people who consider themselves quite sophisticated about such matters. I am not suggesting that you hoard your expertise. I am not recommending that you become one of those pinched, suspicious professionals who treats every question as a threat. That is not wisdom. That is simply fear wearing the costume of strategy, and it is nearly as destructive as its opposite. What I am saying is this: the comprehensive, organized, tested, hard-won body of knowledge that you have assembled through years of difficulty, failure, correction, and refinement, that specific and irreplaceable structure of understanding, is your most valuable material possession. And most talented people scatter it like seed on concrete, for free, to anyone who expresses mild interest in the desperate hope of being valued. Here is what I have observed over 8 decades. When you explain your entire method in the first conversation, hoping to demonstrate your worth, the person across from you takes the method and finds someone cheaper to execute it. When you build a comprehensive proposal that lays out your full thinking, hoping to earn the contract, the company takes the proposal and implements it without you. When you volunteer your deepest insight freely in a room full of people who have not invested anything to be there, the room nods, thanks you, and disperses. And your insight now belongs to everyone, and therefore compensates no one. This is not cynicism, it is observation. There is a principle I have seen operate without exception in every domain I have observed over a long life. People assign value proportional to what they have been required to invest to receive something. When you give your knowledge away without friction, without fair exchange, without any requirement that the other person meet you with something of commensurate weight, you are not teaching the world that you are generous. You are teaching the world that your knowledge is cheap, and the world learns quickly. I want to tell you about another friend. Her name was Dorothea Vanlish. She was a business strategist, not the kind who appears on stages with wireless microphones, but the quiet, precise kind, whose clients built genuine things using her thinking. Dorothea's fatal habit was what I came to privately call the full consultation in the first meeting. She would sit across from a prospective client and, in the course of 90 minutes, give them an essentially complete map of their situation and its solutions. Because she was genuinely brilliant and could not help herself, and because she believed, with sincere and heartbreaking optimism, that showing people everything she knew would convince them to hire her. Some of them hired her, but a great many of them thanked her warmly, paid her nothing for the meeting, and came away with exactly what they had needed. They had simply needed a diagnosis. Dorothea had provided one for free before any agreement was in place. Over a 20-year career, she calculated once, late at night, in a moment of exhausted honesty, she recounted to me later, that she had given away the equivalent of 4 full years of paid work in free first meetings. 4 years. Your knowledge is not a performance. It is not an audition. It is not the price of admission into a room that should already respect your presence. It is a rare and specific material. Treat it accordingly. Share it, yes. Teach, yes. Be generous with what you know, because knowledge that is never transmitted is its own kind of poverty. But structure that sharing so that it happens within real exchanges, so that the person receiving your knowledge is required to bring something of genuine weight to the table, so that the act of transmission carries value in both directions. Otherwise, you are simply funding other people's progress with your own irreplaceable resources and calling it professional development. The third finger. The third thing you must never give away is your standards. This is the one that I believe damages people most deeply, because it does not feel like giving anything away. It feels like wisdom. It feels like flexibility. It feels like the mature acceptance that life requires compromise, and that holding out for ideal conditions is the luxury of people who have not yet understood how the world works. I'm going to tell you something that 81 years have made me entirely certain of. Every time you accept work priced below what it is worth, you are not surviving. You are training the market to see you as inexpensive. Every time you tolerate a client or a collaborator or a partner who treats you with carelessness, you are not being professional. You are publishing a notice that carelessness is acceptable in your presence. Every time you lower your standards because fear has convinced you that something is better than nothing, you are not being strategic. You are building a life-size structure made entirely of compromise, and you are planning to live inside it. The accumulation of small standard violations is the mechanism by which talented people imprison themselves. Not one catastrophic decision, hundreds of small ones, each one individually defensible, each one in context seemingly reasonable, and collectively they construct something that looks remarkably like a permanent ceiling. I told this to Caspian Drell, and I watched his face do the thing that faces do when something true lands on them after a long period of being avoided. A kind of quiet, reluctant recognition. Not surprise, because the people I tell this to are never truly surprised. They know, on some level. They have always known. What they have lacked is permission to act on what they know, because the fear that enforces their compromises is powerful and specific, and has learned exactly where to apply pressure. Your standards are not arrogance. I want to say that again, because it is the misunderstanding that most reliably keeps this particular gate locked. Your standards are not arrogance. They are not entitlement. They are not the refusal of a difficult reality. They are the architecture inside which your best work becomes possible. A person without standards is a craftsman without a workshop. The conditions for genuine excellence simply do not exist. And here is what I have seen, without exception, every time someone has found the courage to raise their floor and hold it. The transactions that drop away when you raise your standards are not transactions you could have built anything lasting with. They were always temporary. They were always extractive. Their departure does not represent loss. It represents clarification. What remains, what rises to meet a higher standard, is the material from which something real can be constructed. But you must hold the floor. You must hold it even when holding it is frightening. You must hold it especially when holding it is frightening, because the moment you drop below it out of fear, fear learns that this is a lever that works on you, and it will use it again, every time, with increasing confidence. Caspian Drell sat in my bookshop until the street lamps came on. He left without saying very much, but he left differently than he arrived. There was something in the quality of his silence that had a different texture, something that was not yet confidence, but had a similar architecture. I heard from him some months later. He had declined a project that offered him a third of what his work deserved. He had restructured his mornings so that his sharpest hours belonged entirely to his own building. He had stopped laying out his complete thinking before any agreement was in place. He said he sounded like himself again. Those were the words someone who loved him used. I thought about Perivel Osmond, who had designed beautiful spaces for other people to inhabit, while living in progressively smaller ones himself. I thought about Dorothea Vanlish, who had given away 4 years of her finest thinking to rooms that gave nothing in return. I thought about my third buried friend, Amal Trent, who had held his standards so loosely for so long that by the end he could not remember what they had originally been. I'm 81 years old. I have cold tea beside me more often than hot. The bookshop smells like cedar and old rain, and I would not change it for anything. But I'm still here, still watching, still waiting for the next person to walk through that door, holding something upside down. When they arrive, I will tell them the same thing I have told you today. Your time is finite and irreplaceable. Guard it like a farmer guards his seed grain in winter. Your knowledge was forged through difficulty that no one else has lived. It is rare material. Exchange it with the weight it deserves. Your standards are not the obstacle between you and success. They are the foundation upon which success can actually be built. Do not give these things away. Not for approval, not for belonging. Not for the temporary relief of having something in your account when fear tells you that something is better than nothing. You are sufficient without the offering. Remember that. If something I said today pressed on a place in you that has been quietly hurting, if some part of this felt less like new information and more like finally hearing something you have always known said aloud, then stay close, subscribe. There is more where this came from. And the next conversation may be the one that changes the specific shape of the life you are building. The door to Halverson and Dust is always open, but the tea is almost never hot.